Here we have some typical cast iron railway wagon plates from different years and regions of the railways of Britain. Wagon plates can be found in different stages of corrosion due to age and wear, and I'm going to show you how they can be restored whilst keeping things as simple as possible using minimal tools and accessories. Putting the plate on something such as foam or cardboard to absorb some vibration will help reduce the risk of the plate cracking if worked on a hard surface, however unlikely cracking might be, but will likely reduce the bouncing of the plate whilst you're working on it and might also save your hands and arms from excessive vibration feedback through a drill. And if you're working on the ground instead of a bench, whilst a little bit awkward, it can be done, as I've done many plates this way. But if you have a workbench, then restoring the plate and especially cleaning the edges is often easier. I placed a clock on the bench for you to see how long it took, but didn't account for the vibration, and the clock promptly bounced off the bench. But to clean the plate up from start to finish took about an hour and a half. I use a variety of different size blunted and sharper screwdrivers to dig out the more substantial rust and any old paint, as well as using a drill with a variety of wire brush wheels. Using the screwdrivers allows you to get the solid rust and paint off that the wire wheels can't or are unable to reach, and although leaving tool marks is undesirable, being cast iron it can be quite difficult to inflict damage on the plate. If you have one of the less common alloy railway plates, be very careful how you restore it, and be gentle with tools and wire brushes, as they can mark and leave deep and permanent scratches very easily, and you can even wear away the characters with too much enthusiastic cleaning up. I suggest wearing some face and eye protection, as solid bits of rust can fly off. I would also recommend wearing a face mask, as corrosion dust is produced during this process, and some paints used decades ago when these plates were made might contain lead. There are a variety of other methods you can use, such as using a heat gun or paint stripper to clean the plate up, which can be useful, but these won't necessarily remove all the corrosion or paint in the hard to reach places and can still leave residue, which means additional work to remove, as well as the plate potentially becoming too hot to work with. And although they can be effective, they won't remove all the rust. Once the corrosion is removed as much as possible, I use smaller polishing wire brushes to get any remaining tiny bits of corrosion off, which then makes it look better and ready for painting. And a final wipe over with some type of cloth removes any dust residue. I find it agreeable when plates retain an aged look and character due to reasonable wear and tear, but when they're heavily corroded or look really tatty, I think they look better for being restored and not left to look like scrap that's ready to be recycled. I always restore plates myself, but for this video I also took one plate to a local company here in North Wales that provides a shot blasting service. You can make the restoration process easier by getting the plate shot or sandblasted and even powder coated as well to save time and effort, and it's certainly a great alternative if you don't fancy getting covered in rust and dust, and it saves you having to source some of the paint needed. The blasting can be a bit of a messy process, so filming it isn't really practical due to the dusty environment, but you can see the difference after half the plate has been shot blasted and the other half is still to be done. Once blasting is finished, the plate is prepared further and put into the oven. Once it comes out, the powder coating is applied while the plate is still hot, which helps the coating bind to the metal. It is then further baked, and when it comes back out of the oven, it's left to cool down. Costs were £20 for the shot blasting and £20 for the powder coating, total £40, and they were very helpful and did a great job, as you can see here. When it comes to painting, I don't prepare the plates any further after removing the rust, as I like to avoid covering up any details on the plate with too many layers of paint or other substances, and the paint on the plates that I've restored with my method are still just as good today as they were 20 years ago. I prefer spray painting plates, as the paint layer is thinner and results in detail being more defined than using a hand brush with a thicker layer of paint. Make sure you get a decent quality paint, something that isn't too thin, which runs, drips or will flake off after a relatively short time, as some cheap paints can tend to do. You don't want to spoil your hard work with a finish that looks shoddy just to save a small amount of money. There are a wide variety of spray paints you can choose from, but I use Plasticoat Matte Black. The link's in the description below. It goes on well and gives a really nice finish. Don't put too much paint on, and make sure you wipe spray can nozzles regularly, as spray can build up around the nozzle and you can then get large blobs unexpectedly flying off onto your sprayed surface. When dry, The last stage is picking out the characters and border in white. Patience is needed to get a precise finish. This painting takes a bit of practice to get it looking good, and despite painting many plates, I'm still learning, and deteriorating eyesight with age doesn't help either, so I do make some mistakes at times. Depending on how many lines of characters there are and how far apart they're spaced from each other, it's not a bad idea to paint separate lines of letters and numbers on different days to allow drying, or you could find your hand brushing against wet painted lines of characters when trying to paint the next line. I find Hammerite Smooth Satin White is good to work with as it has a good consistency and finish, but using a fine brush for detailed painting, you might need to go over part of some of the characters a second time for better coverage. Once dry, I don't use any kind of sealer or finish. I just leave the plates as they are and they then go with the collection, which you'll see in a moment. You can also repair plates with chunks missing without resorting to any type of metalwork repairs, which can be easily removed at a later date to do metal repairs. Here is an Eastern Region plate made at Birmingham Carriage and Wagon Works in 1949 that I obtained and restored some time ago. First, the rust and old paint was removed and the plate further cleaned with a wire wheel polishing brush. Next, using another wagon plate as a template, or even by turning over the damaged plate and using the good opposite side, which is identical in shape, a piece of 4mm thick hardboard was drawn on and cut out to the right shape of the missing chunk of metal. The thickness of the main cast iron base, not including the raised border around the edge on most wagon plates, is 6mm, so 4mm is thick and sturdy enough to stay in place and gives you 1mm either side to make finishing touches. The 4mm hardboard piece is superglued in place, and then plaster filler is used to build up the front and back and to make a raised border where it is missing. The filler is textured while still pliable to match the uneven surface of the cast iron, and after sanding the border to the correct contour, the plate is spray painted and characters picked out in white, and the repair is really quite solid. Even quite extensive damage can be repaired in this way to make a plate worth displaying. This LMS plate with 2 large chunks missing from it looks decidedly worse for wear, but using the same techniques as on the Birmingham plate, I was able to make it much more presentable. In this photo, you can see a plate in the middle of the main frame of the wagon, but they could be found at various points on the frame, as in this next example of a guard's van showing above one of the wheels, and I'd like to thank the National Railway Museum for allowing me to use these photos that show the plates to such a good effect. Wagon plates usually came in pairs, one for each side of the wagon frame, and often the number could be found painted on the side of the wagon in larger characters to make identification easier, as can be seen in these 2 photos. The restored wagon plates are added to the collection, shown here so you can see some of the variations of different makers and regions that are out there. These plates are called D plates, which refers to the style and shape, but there are many other types of plates that were made, and although they showed similar information such as the wagon number, maybe the manufacturer and perhaps the region the wagon was allocated to, they could be very different in style, shape and size. I've limited myself to having D plates so as not to let the collecting bug get out of hand, but there's always one more that you haven't got that you keep a lookout for. Until next time.